When you picture a Viking, you probably see a massive warrior with a horned helmet, wild hair, and a bloodthirsty scream. Maybe he's charging off a longship, axe raised, ready to burn a monastery. That image is everywhere. Movies, TV shows, video games. But here's the thing, almost none of it is accurate. The real Viking warriors were far more complex, more strategic, and honestly, more fascinating than anything Hollywood has ever shown you. Let's start with the most famous myth of all, the horned helmet. Vikings never wore them. Not once. Not ever. That idea came from 19th century Romantic artists who wanted to make ancient Scandinavians look dramatic and exotic. The real helmets were simple rounded iron caps, sometimes with a nose guard, practical, not decorative. If you actually wore horns into battle, your enemy could grab them and snap your neck. Vikings were smart enough to know that. In fact, only one complete Viking Age helmet has ever been found. It was discovered at a farm called Gurmanbu in Norway, and it's a plain iron dome with eye guards, no horns anywhere. So who were these people really? The Viking Age lasted roughly from 793 to 1066 AD. It began with the infamous raid on the monastery at Lindisfarne in northeastern England. Monks described it as a terror unlike anything they had witnessed before. But raiding was only a small part of what Vikings did. They were traders, explorers, farmers, craftspeople, lawmakers, and poets. The word Viking itself probably comes from the Old Norse word for creek or inlet, referring to the coastal areas where they launched their ships. Going Viking meant going on an expedition. It was something you did, not something you permanently were. Most Norsemen spent the majority of their lives farming, fishing, and raising livestock. The raiding season was summer, when the seas were calm enough to cross. Now let's talk about what made Viking warriors genuinely formidable. First, their weapons. Forget the giant double-headed battle axes you see in movies. The most common Viking weapon was actually a spear. Spears were cheap to make, effective at range, and deadly in formation. A line of warriors with overlapping shields and spears pointing forward was an incredibly difficult thing to break through. Swords existed, but they were expensive and usually owned only by wealthy warriors or leaders. A good Viking sword was a prized possession, often given a name and passed down through generations. Some of the finest blades were made using a technique called pattern welding, where different types of iron and steel were twisted and forged together, creating both strength and a distinctive wavy pattern on the blade that looked almost alive. The shield was arguably the most important piece of equipment. Viking shields were round, made of planked wood, usually about 3 feet across. They were light enough to move quickly but strong enough to absorb blows. Warriors fought in a formation called the shield wall, locking their shields together to create a defensive barrier. This was not mindless charging. It was disciplined, coordinated group tactics. The shield wall required trust, training, and teamwork. If one person broke formation, everyone could die. Commanders would shout orders, rotate fresh fighters to the front line, and look for moments to push forward or pull back. It was organized, methodical, and brutally effective. Here's something else movies get wrong. Vikings were not unusually large. Skeletal remains show that the average Viking man stood about 5 feet 7 inches tall, which was normal for the period. They didn't tower over their opponents. What they had was exceptional fitness from a lifetime of physical labor, rowing ships, farming, building, and fighting. They also had remarkable endurance. Crossing the North Atlantic in an open boat requires a toughness that's hard for modern people to even imagine. Archaeological evidence also shows that Vikings took personal grooming seriously. Combs are among the most common artifacts found at Viking sites. They braided their hair, trimmed their beards, and bathed at least once a week, which was actually more often than most Europeans at the time. Viking warfare was built on speed and surprise. Their longships were engineering masterpieces. These vessels had a shallow draft, meaning they could sail up rivers and land directly on beaches. no harbor needed. A raiding party could appear without warning, strike fast, and disappear before any organized defense could form. This wasn't cowardice, it was brilliant tactics. Why fight a pitched battle against a larger force when you can achieve your objective and leave before they even know what happened? The ships themselves were works of art, built with overlapping planks in a technique called clinker construction. They were flexible enough to bend with ocean waves rather than break against them, which is why Vikings could cross open ocean while other European sailors hugged the coastline. But Vikings absolutely could fight pitched battles when they needed to. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066 is a perfect example. A Viking army, led by King Harold Hardrada, invaded England with roughly 9,000 warriors. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, one enormous Norse warrior held the bridge single-handedly against the entire English army, cutting down anyone who approached until someone floated under the bridge in a barrel and stabbed him from below. Whether that specific story is true or not, it tells you something about the reputation these fighters had earned. Let's talk about berserkers, because they're real, sort of. The Old Norse sources describe warriors called berserker who fought in a trance-like fury, seemingly immune to pain and fear. The name itself likely means bear shirt, suggesting they wore animal skins into battle. Some scholars think they used psychoactive substances, possibly mushrooms or henbane. Others believe it was a psychological state, a kind of battle frenzy induced through ritual and adrenaline. What we know for certain is that berserker behavior was considered both valuable and dangerous. These warriors were useful in battle but unpredictable, and several Icelandic sagas mention laws being passed to ban berserker behavior during peacetime. You could be outlawed for going berserk at a public gathering. Viking society also had a fascinating relationship with women and warfare. While the extent of female warriors is debated among historians, we have solid evidence that some women did fight. In 2017, DNA analysis confirmed that a high-status Viking warrior buried at Birka in Sweden, long assumed to be male because of the weapons in the grave, was actually female. She was buried with a sword, an axe, a spear, armor-piercing arrows, and 2 horses. This wasn't some random burial. The weapons and war-planning materials suggested she was a military leader. The Old Norse sagas also reference shield maidens, women who chose to fight alongside men, and while sagas blend history with legend, the Birka discovery suggests these stories had real roots. The Vikings also had a sophisticated code of honor and law. They invented the Thing, a governing assembly where free men gathered to settle disputes, make laws, and administer justice. The Icelandic Althing, established in 930 AD, is often called the oldest surviving parliament in the world. Vikings valued reputation above almost everything else. Your word was your bond. Breaking an oath was considered one of the worst things a person could do. This wasn't a lawless society, it was a society with different laws than what medieval Christian Europe was accustomed to. Their reach was staggering. Vikings settled Iceland, Greenland, and briefly North America, nearly 500 years before Columbus. They founded Dublin, established the Danelaw across much of England, served as elite bodyguards for the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople, and traded along river routes stretching from Scandinavia to Baghdad. Arabic coins from the Middle East have been found in Scandinavian graves, and Viking graffiti is carved into the marble balcony of the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. They didn't just raid. They built an interconnected world spanning from North America to the Middle East. What ultimately ended the Viking Age wasn't military defeat, it was cultural transformation. As Scandinavian societies gradually adopted Christianity and became organized kingdoms, the raiding expeditions slowed and eventually stopped. The warriors didn't disappear. They became knights, kings, and nobles in the emerging medieval European order. William the Conqueror, who invaded England in 1066, was himself a descendant of Viking settlers in Normandy. The very word Normandy comes from Northmen. The Viking legacy didn't end, it evolved. So the next time you see a Viking in a movie wearing a horned helmet and screaming like a maniac, remember the reality. Real Viking warriors were disciplined fighters who used sophisticated tactics. They were part of a complex society with laws, poetry, and democratic assemblies. They explored farther and traded more widely than almost any civilization of their era. They didn't need Hollywood to make them interesting. The truth is already extraordinary enough.